Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar. I am here joined with Everett Considine. I'm Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson, and in a second I'm going to introduce Everett and he's going to come on as well. I just want to welcome you, and let me just take a look at the chat thread here for a second because I know that you guys are all in there saying hello. Let me find my chat. Yay! Greetings from the East Bay, says Catherine. Yeah, so a couple of people are like, oh, it hasn't started yet. I'm not seeing anything. And people are like, yeah, they just haven't started yet. If anyone knows, they said, Susan always runs a little late, almost always. Leo is here from Acapulco. Lori is from Vancouver Island. We've got Carol from Texas. Oh, so sweet. Hey, everybody. Alberta, Canada. Someone just said, it's so hard to be patient. I am sorry about that. I know it's a big defect that I have, that I always run late to stuff. Oh, hi, everybody. Maha says, greetings from San Francisco. Marianne from Rochester, New York. That's where I live. Atlanta, Georgia's in the house. We've got over 1,000 people here live, and we've got several more thousand registered. So we've got more people coming. Monica from Switzerland, Joy from Toronto, Mimi from New Mexico. Amazing. Hey, everyone. All right. So in a second here, I'm going to mute the chat thread, just silence it just while we do the main content portion. And then we'll reawaken the chat thread at the end when we do Q&A. We're going to stay on for live Q&A through the end. So you might want to grab a pen or a pencil to jot down your questions. We're going to be sharing a lot of amazing content tonight. We're going to be talking about where people tend to get stuck in their bright line eating journey, which is really where we tend to get stuck in any journey of healthy living, healthy eating, healthy living, healthy exercising, healthy meditating, all that stuff that we strive to do to take care of ourselves. We have predictable places where we get stuck, and the Bright Line Eating Parts Map is going to really help with that. And the science of self-compassion is going to, I think it's just going to illuminate a lot for you. I can't wait to share this stuff. So I hear people say no video or sound. I want to just be sure. Let me just check my phone. Some people are saying no video or sound, but my team would be telling me if they couldn't see. Is there anyone out there who can see video and sound? I believe people can. Vernon says, hey, y'all, love, integrity, empathy from San Diego, California. Vernon, I like you so much. Sweet. All right. Yeah, wow. Lots of people saying, hi, SBT. The chat thread is now exploding. It's moving so fast, I can't even see it. I see things flashing by. Australia, Missouri, I can see and hear you just fine. Yes, yes, all good, all good, all good. I can see now. Yes, yes. So notice that there's something pinned to the top of the chat thread, which basically says, if you're having any issues with sound or video, please click the reconnect button at the top of the screen, or try refreshing your page, which is that little circular arrow at the top. So I want to introduce now my co-host for this webinar, Everett Considine. Everett, can you come on camera now? You're probably going to blush when I introduce you. I just want to see. It's going to be sweet to see you. Hey, Ev, how are you?
Hey, good. You see me? Am I down in the corner?
I do see you down in the corner.
Oh, there now. I'm with you.
We'll pop you up to full health screen.
Hi.
So this is Everett Considine, everyone. So Everett, when did we first meet? 2015? 2015. Yeah. And one of our original Bright Liners, Lyndon Morris Del Rio, was doing work with Everett on her inner parts and, just getting some deep coaching work from him. And she told me, Susan, you have got to meet Everett Considine. He's going to love you. You're going to love him. And I have a feeling that he could do some really important work in our community. And like I often did in 2015, so still sometimes today, I was like, yeah. I just running so fast, too busy. And I think what happened, Everett, was I started breaking my bright lines where I hadn't in years. I hadn't broken my bright lines in years and years and years. And the stress of everything just started resulting in my lines being wonky. And I said, you know what? I think I need to reach out to this Everett guy and get some support. I got the feeling that you could really help me in my journey. And you did. We did some parts work together, and you provided a really necessary bridge for me to shift my support into bright line eating, which was hard for me at the time because I was leading this movement and in some way some sort of figurehead in it, but I needed to get my support from it too. And I'll never forget the lessons that I got from that. I think we did like 3 coaching sessions together, super powerful. And then Everett started doing bright line eating himself and started working with our bright liners, bright lifers. I started referring people to him left, right, and center, just referring tons of people. And Everett started working with our tribe. Everett, do you want to say a little bit more about all that?
I sometimes I think about like what an amazing combination BLE and parts work is, right? Like when you bring both of them together, either because I was doing parts work and doing internal family systems and struggling with my weight for like the last 20 years. And there's a way you kind of work with weight issues, and it wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. In fact, I kind of had given up. I just thought I'm going to be a fat guy in his 50s. Like there's no choice,
Yeah.
And like I think a lot of us do, right? Because we try and we try and we try and it comes on and it goes off. And so, I also think it was so magical meeting you in this work, because it was kind of a dream that I had given up on, to be in a right size body. And so to have found this approach and then to have it work, right? And then to have the thing that I do, which is internal family systems and this way of working with yourself, and to be able to bring that to the BLE community and have it be so powerful. I just feel like our story is so magical of the coming together of these 2 approaches, and like what is coming out of it is incredible. And the thing that I always will touch into is we always start with the inner critics, right? And our inner critics, are the part of us that aren't self-compassionate to us, right? They're those nagging negative voices, and some people's inner critics are super harsh and some people's are not so harsh. But most of us are kind of overridden with critics. Even people that have done me, even doing my, like, you do your deep inner critic work and you get rid of the really harsh voices, you can probably relate to this. And then you start to notice there's like little subtle ways that we diss ourselves and minimize ourselves and kind of take the bloom off of the rose. It's like, perfectionism, right, comes in. And so when you put together this presentation that you gave on self-compassion, and were able to so articulate so powerfully how self-compassion is really the antidote, right? It's the medicine for the inner critic. And for many of us who have food issues, it's those inner critics that are driving our issues with food. And so, and then of course, what people will hear about later, they're going to hear all this incredible science that you have around self-compassion. But then also this way that the work that I do has this incredible way to get at self-compassion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very grateful to be here and be part of this incredible thing that's happening between us.
Yeah. Oh, Everett, me too. Me too. And I just have a technical thing real quick. Does it sound like my voice is coming out of here? Right there? Or because for some reason your voice is coming out of the...
You sound great to me.
Oh, I sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, then I just won't worry about it then.
Yeah, you sound
Do
really
I sound
clear.
the same if I take this off? Do I still sound the same?
It's the same.
Well, then I just won't even use this then, man. Okay. I'll put back on my headband. There we go. All right. No worries. I could even be wearing earrings. Okay, forget it. We'll forget about that thing. All right, so how about we dive in to the science of self-compassion? Should we just dive in?
Yeah.
Let's dive in. Okay. here we go. I am going to put on my screen share. I'm also going to share this, and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to mute the chat thread here too, folks. So this is the moment that the chat thread's going to go away, and we will bring it back when we do our Q&A. I give my little blurb about why I mute the chat thread, because research shows that when we multitask, it kills the enjoyment for us. We don't enjoy it. And I want us all to enjoy this presentation. I feel really good about it. I love presenting this science. So let's talk about the science of self-compassion. The history is that philosophers, religious leaders, self-help gurus, and psychologists thought and read and wrote about the idea of self-compassion for millennia. But up until recently, no one had ever studied self-compassion scientifically, until Kristin Neff published the first papers on self-compassion in 2003. And in those papers, she defined it. She defined self-compassion. We're going to go over her definition because it's super important. She created a scale to measure it. You can actually take a quiz online to find out how self-compassionate you are. I've taken it, just saying. I'm a self-compassion ninja. Didn't used to be, but I've done my work on it. You can go to selfcompassion.org to take that quiz yourself. It's super cool. And boom, scholarly research on self-compassion just exploded after that. It is still going on and growing at literally an exponential rate. Since 2003, over 1,000 scientific articles and books have been published on self-compassion, and over half of those since 2015. So Kristin Neff has a book on self-compassion called Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. I recommend it. It's a good read. And in that book, she defines self-compassion as having a core that consists of 3 parts. Part 1 is what maybe you think of as self-compassion. It's showing kindness to oneself. And that means showing kindness to ourselves, not just when we think we're doing a great job and we're happy, but when we're experiencing suffering, when we're going through a tough time, after a failure, after not behaving the way we'd like, after letting ourselves down, after letting others down, when emotionally distraught, when blowing it in some way. Self-compassion is not this. It's this, to our inner self. Now, there are 2 other parts of self-compassion, though. It's not just being kind to yourself. It's also framing your experience of imperfection in light of the shared human experience. Basically saying, everybody blows it. I'm not unusual here. This is part of the human experience. Everybody drops balls. So it's seeing yourself as part of a very flawed, very human family. And remembering all the people you know who've done similar things, imagining that there are hundreds of thousands of others who've done those same things, felt that same way. Really calling to moment, in the moment, that you are not alone. The opposite of that, of course, is isolation. And that's what imperfection, blowing it, especially with our food, tends to pull us toward. We want to isolate. The tendency is to isolate or to compare, to look at our neighbor or the other person in the boot camp who's lost, 148 pounds and they've only been doing it for a week, to just look at someone else's experience and go, oh, they're doing it right. They're doing it better. They've got it all together. So keeping in mind the breadth of the human experience and realizing that you're just one of many who soar and suffer sometimes even in the same day, is part of self-compassion. And then the third part is mindful awareness of the whole process, of the negative thoughts and emotions as they crop up, of what we might then do to adaptively cope in that moment. If you're not mindfully aware, you can't pull in helpful strategies or get support or any of those things. So there is a level of mindful awareness that's needed to kind of usher self-compassion into the room. So one might also rephrase that as facing reality. So the idea is we need to see things as they are, no more, no less, in order to respond to our current situation in the most compassionate and therefore most effective manner. So I have a little inquiry for you. Let's take a look at that first component of self-compassion. Kindness to oneself. Think about how you behave when you have a close friend who feels bad about him or herself or is really struggling in some way. What do you typically do? What do you say? And what kind of tone do you use to speak to them? Now think about times when you feel bad about yourself and you're struggling. How do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? What do you do? What do you say? And what's the tone in which you talk to yourself? Did you notice a difference? If you did, you're not alone. A lot of people notice that it's relatively easy to pull up instant self-compassion for someone else who's struggling and feels like they've blown it. In fact, to ooze and bleed with self-compassion for them, and to wish so fervently that they could be gentler on themselves, that they could see that they're not as bad as they're thinking they are. And yet with ourselves, we often hold ourselves to such high standards and just crack the whip. So I want to share with you some of the benefits of self-compassion. Because when this research came out on self-compassion, it was contrasted with the research on self-esteem. And we're going to get to that in a second. But the benefits of self-compassion are outrageously high. The first one is emotional resilience, which is being able to adapt well to stressful situations, essentially rolling with the punches, having grace under fire. Emotional stability. And research shows that self-compassion accounts for, you guys, this is absolutely phenomenal. Self-compassion accounts for 1/3 to 1/2 of the variance in people's levels of anxiety and depression. What that means is, across a population of people, like around the world, people vary in how much anxiety and depression they experience. And if you measure their level of self-compassion, you can predict 1/2 to 1/3, 1/3 to 1/2 of their levels of anxiety and depression, meaning self-compassion accounts for that much, which is simply outrageous. Let me just give you an analogy. Genes account for about half of the variance in IQ, genetics. So we're talking about self-compassion having such a high impact on anxiety and depression, it's ridiculous. These findings blew the scientific community away. And that's probably why papers on self-compassion are exploding the way they are in the research community. Benefit number 2 is emotional intelligence. You've heard of IQ. Well, there's also EQ. You might have heard of that as well. Emotional intelligence, knowing how to respond in situations that are emotionally tricky, that are nuanced, that require good relational skills. Just for the record, it turns out that it's emotional intelligence, not IQ, that predicts someone's career success. The third benefit is personal growth in every way. So people who have a lot of self-compassion grow and change and flourish. People with low self-compassion struggle to grow. And perhaps you can see that because perfectionism gets in the way, all that cracking the whip gets in the way. It's hard to perform well and to trust risky emotional territory, which is what's required for emotional growth, for personal growth, when you are living under the yoke of a tyrant. And that's what a lot of folks are inside their own head, is a tyrant to themselves. Kind to other people, unbelievably kind to other people, and yet holding themselves to a standard, talking to themselves in ways that they would never talk to anyone else. What happens is that self-compassion fosters clarity about the things in oneself that need changing and the willingness to admit areas of needed improvement. So, for example, there was research on emotionally and physically abusive men, and therapy didn't help them stop being abusive to their families, and the law didn't help them stop being emotionally and physically abusive to their families, but a very simple self-compassion training did. So let's go back to this question. How is self-compassion different from self-esteem? So self-esteem, let's define that one first, is an evaluation of our worthiness. So essentially believing that we're good, valuable people. It's also believing that we're capable of handling what life dishes out, that we're worthy of happiness. So capable and worthy. Now, remember, self-compassion is kindness to oneself, a mind state where you remember that you're part of the human family, that everyone suffers and everyone blows it, and a certain degree of mindfulness in the moment so that you can cope effectively. Now, Kristen Neff and her colleagues have tested the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion in dozens of studies. And here's what they find. There's some similarities. Both self-esteem and self-compassion are associated with less anxiety and less depression. They're both associated with more happiness, more optimism, and more positive emotions. But when things go wrong, or when our egos are threatened, that's when self-compassion has a clear advantage. And just saying, I don't know what kind of life you live. How often do things go a little wrong? And how often are our egos a little threatened, right? Like every day, right? Every day, here and there. It happens every day. And when the chips are down, self-esteem often deserts us, but self-compassion doesn't. And that's when the benefits of self-compassion shine. Feelings of self-compassion don't depend on being special. They don't depend on being above average. They don't depend on meeting ideal goals. And so what Kristen Neff and her colleagues have found is that high self-compassion has all of the advantages of high self-esteem and so much more. So the big question is, how can we develop an effective, real self-compassion? And here's where we run into a problem. Most of the people that I coach in Bright Line Eating, they don't want to be nasty to themselves inside their own heads. They don't want to be, and they can't help it. And the problem is the current research on self-compassion doesn't actually provide the structural depth necessary to help us to develop a reliable and fully mature sense of self-compassion. And that's a big problem. I've read Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion, and I don't find the roadmap there for actually gaining self-compassion. I find the rationale for why it's incredibly helpful and necessary to have high self-compassion. That is clear. Great, you've convinced me. But how do I get there? How do I stop being so nasty to myself inside my own head? So if you're trying to develop self-compassion, you're thinking something like, oh, I'm so hard on myself. I really need to change that. I want to change that. Obviously, self-compassion is so good. I should change that. And I don't want anyone to know how harshly I talk to myself. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. I'll be sure to fix this on my own. I'll work on it. I've tried to change this in the past, but I keep failing. My inner critic is as strong as ever. And the irony here is that, can you see it? Striving for self-compassion actually produces more isolation, more self-criticism. It actually creates a downward spiral. God, here I am being hard on myself. Oh, I'm doing it again. Right? It's worse. It basically creates another thing that's wrong that we need to fix. So we spiral down. And there is a solution. And funny enough, it's in the brain and the mind. It's actually in the way we conceive of the mind. So I want to talk a little bit about different philosophical viewpoints on the mind. These big questions like, who am I? The biggest questions. If we ask, who am I? The traditional prevailing view, the mono-mind view is, well, not hard. I'm me. I am one person, one mind, one soul, one spirit, undivided, with free will. This view is ubiquitous and naturally assumed. This is the dominant paradigm in our society. And we never question whether it's true. We also never question whether it's helpful. The trouble is, we watch ourselves act against our own highest good by mindlessly eating something that we know we have no business eating, don't want to be eating, not healthy for us to eat. So we watch ourselves do that sometimes, right? All the time, if you add all the things. I mean, I'll watch my daughter come into my office and say, Mommy, can you play with us? And I'll watch myself go, yeah, I'll be there in a second, sweetie. And then I'll watch myself take 40 minutes to wrap up a bunch of things on my laptop. I watch myself do things that I'm not proud of all the time. And I'm not alone in that. I know I'm not. And we know that we have fears and harsh self-judgments and all kinds of emotions and thoughts that keep us from being who we want to be. We know that. We all do, right? So what do? Well, what we typically do is we work on ourselves. Maybe for a bit we hide or we ignore what we're not liking about ourselves, right? We go into some denial and we numb out for a bit. But more often, we work on it. We get to a point where we really try. And then the working on it feels like pushing a boulder up a hill, like Sisyphus, over and over again. We fight with ourselves. We discipline ourselves. We try harder. We double down. And at the end of the day, what we have to admit is we just can't control ourselves in certain areas, which for many of us can lead to deep shame. So we go to therapy to get help correcting our irrational beliefs, to process our unhelpful emotions, but we stay stuck. So we learn to meditate. We grapple with our thoughts. We might try to ignore them or transcend them or let them simply be. We might try not to interact with them, not to explore them. So what happens? We're maybe a little calmer with pockets of happiness, but our problems are still there. And we know it, we feel it, and we can see it too, because we're probably still eating, still judging ourselves, still feeling like we haven't found the answer. So I want to say that there is another way. And the purpose of this lecture is really, truly deeply to invite you to take a second look at who you really are. I want to present to you a different paradigm, a paradigm that I think is more useful and also more true to your lived experience. And you can be the judge of that. I'll present it and you can just see if it resonates. It is a minority view in society today, in psychology today, but it's a strong minority view, and it has been for millennia. And the paradigm, in a nutshell, is that the self is not one, but many. That's it. That's the paradigm. The self is not one, but many. In other words, we have parts. So when we want something or think something or whatever, usually it's a part of us that wants it or thinks it. And sometimes there's a part that wants and thinks something entirely different from that. Our parts are constantly interacting with each other inside of us. That's what we call thinking. They're using their emotions and impulses to try to control our activities and behavior. They're consistent, not transient, coming in and out of existence and being replaced by new parts. They're consistent. They're multidimensional, meaning like unlike sadness and joy in the Disney movie Inside Out, they're more multidimensional than that, more like kind of real people, right? They have aspects to them, lots of different facets. Some of them are helpful, some of them are not helpful. They're hugely powerful to impact our behavior, our actions, our feelings, and also to transform themselves and develop positive, valuable qualities that benefit us. So the implication here is huge. And Richard Schwartz perhaps said it best. He said, if you consider your inner parts to be residents of the mind with full range personalities, as well as abundant intelligence, autonomy, and power, and if you think they contain many valuable qualities and resources, and that they reflect the natural state of the mind, you'll listen to them with genuine curiosity and respect, and relate to them in a compassionate, loving way. Now, Richard Schwartz wrote an amazing book called Many Minds, One Self, Evidence for a Radical Shift in Paradigm. Many Minds, One Self. And much of the rest of this lecture actually comes from this book right here. I highly recommend it. So the history of the parts perspective goes like this. This is going to be brief, but it's kind of interesting to see how far back this idea goes. The first written record of the many minds concept comes from an ancient Egyptian text, 2200 BC, over 4,000 years ago, when we barely had writing. We had Egyptian hieroglyphics. And in this ancient Egyptian text, a man argues with his Ba, or his soul. And it's kind of a long story, but in this text, basically the man's saying he wants to kill himself, and his soul is saying, no, that's not a good idea. And the man's like, but I really want to. And the soul is like, no, you shouldn't kill yourself. And the man says, but I'll offer you a really good burial. Like, can I bribe you basically to get on board with the suicide concept if I just say that, like, we'll get a really fancy tomb and, like, get a bunch of stuff buried with us. And eventually in this text, the soul kind of prevails, and it's not really clear exactly what happens. But so this man's having an argument with himself about committing suicide. It's kind of an interesting ancient text, 4,000 years ago. Then fast forward to Socrates, 400 BC. It's my favorite quote about parts. I love what Socrates said. Socrates was a huge believer in parts all through his work. He believed for sure that the mind is multiple. He saw it no other way. And he said, look, one mind cannot both want and not want at the same time. There you go. And therefore, we are all at least two, because we do all the time, right? Therefore, the mind must be at least dual. And Plato believed in parts, and Aristotle believed in parts. Let's talk about Plato for a second. From his dialogue, Phaedrus, he depicted a human as two horses, the white one being upright and honorable, and the black one being dark and crooked and insolent and impulsive. And I so relate to this. Totally. Got the white horse and the black horse for sure, right? And there's all kinds of art depicting the two horses of Plato as the human. You go to the Bible. Biblical stories commonly depict people at war with themselves, a battle between different inner parts. So these two wills within me, one old, one new, one servant of the flesh, the other of the spirit, were in conflict, and between them they tore my soul apart. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Awesome. So relate to this, right? So then if we move forward in history, in the 1500s, during the Spanish Inquisition, during that time, the monomind view predominated, as it does now. And what happened was any signs of a multiple inner life were seen as evidence for demonic possession. So it became very unsafe to express a dual mind perspective. And then it was on you to prove your sanity. So if you couldn't prove that any other thoughts you were getting, any messages were from God, you were assumed to be possessed by demons, and the punishment for that could be death. Now, Saint Teresa of Avila proposed a third option, not you're sane or you're crazy, but she proposed that signs of a multiple inner world might not be messages from God nor demonic possession, but were perhaps a medical condition, like an illness. And thus was born the medicalization or the pathologizing of the notion of inner parts. And that is the perspective that has carried forward to the modern era, the medicalization or pathologizing of inner parts. We have disorders, multiple personality disorder, which used to be called by, let's see, what do you speak? Anyway, I forget what it used to be called. I just had a strange mental blank spot there. Sorry about that. And what happened was, with Saint Teresa, the unitary view of the self became the widespread default view. So let's talk about multiple personality disorder for a little bit. What happened, and this is, they were good movies, but I think they were a little unfortunate because of the notoriety that they gave this notion of inner parts and how pathologized they made it seem. There were these movies that came out that showed people who had radically different personalities inside of them and had severe mental illness. So in 1957, the movie Lizzie came out. And in that same year, The Three Faces of Eve, Joanne Woodward won the Academy Award for that movie for Best Actress. And then Sybil came out in 1976. And so Hollywood kind of jumped on board and started projecting this notion that having inner parts means you're crazy, basically. Now, there's good reason why mainstream society buys readily into the pathologized view of multiplicity. It makes a lot of sense, and here's why. Because patients with strong active parts, like really strong active parts, nearly always report having been severely abused. And the parts create deviant and distressing symptoms. The assumption is that a healthy mind, therefore, must be unitary. But that's a flawed assumption, that any sort of parts means a pathological condition. Oh, there we go. It did used to, okay, I just got clear. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now it's called dissociative identity disorder. And it was renamed that in 1994 in the 4th edition of the DSM, which, if you don't know, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the handbook for classifying disorders in the United States only. Europe has its own classification system, and they have other systems around the world. All right, so here's the real deal. Trauma doesn't create parts. Trauma doesn't split the psyche into different parts. What trauma does is it makes the parts that we already have more extreme, more separate from each other, and therefore more noticeable. And I think it's fair to say that at some point, having very extreme, very separate parts could be, classified as a mental disorder. But that doesn't mean that the rest of us don't have parts. We do. The assumption that the parts perspective goes on is that the healthy mind is multiple but harmonious. So the parts aren't that different from one another. And therefore, the inner parts don't stand out as much and can go unnoticed. So Albert Einstein said, whether you can observe a thing or not depends on the theory which you use. It is the theory which decides what can be observed. And once you adopt a parts theory, what happens is you start to see how your motivations really are coming from very different places sometimes. Like for me, for example, I want to stick with my bright lines. I'm someone who does bright line eating. And then every now and then I'll get this part of myself that will well up that really wants to take her comfort in food, that really is proposing that there's this reason or that reason or this circumstance in which this extra food, this sweet food, this treat or whatever is a really good idea right now. And Everett's going to talk about that. That's the food indulger part. And I have got that part, and it's strong, and it comes up sometimes. Now, it can be so subtle that I might not even notice that it's a different part. But when I have the theory, like Albert Einstein said, when I have this parts theory, I see, this is my indulger part. And it's so helpful to notice, because then I can ask my indulger, I can sort of investigate what my indulger wants, what it's after, what it's thinking, So back to history. What happened is there was a zigzag, basically. From the Renaissance until the modern day, the mind's multiplicity has been discovered, lost, discovered, lost, discovered, and lost again, over and over and over. Now, in different centuries, different eras, a theorist is likely to discover it if they're a theorist with, first of all, a mind open enough to consider the possibility, right? Because it's a little bit of a radical possibility. I know it might have made you does me a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit like, oh, what are you saying about me? Like these people living inside me, or, especially with the modern view on multiplicity, it definitely feels like, what are you saying? Are you saying that I'm a whack job? Like what, this seems a little weird here, right? So a theorist has to have a mind open enough to consider the possibility. and an ability to become purely curious, and the belief that there might be benefit in asking questions of what might manifest at first as emotions or thoughts or sensations. You start to ask questions and you realize that emotion or that thought is coming from a part, and the part has other thoughts on it and they can answer back, and suddenly you're in business. And finally, the courage to speak and write about it in the face of probable skepticism or ridicule among their colleagues. And as we'll see as we keep going, there are a lot of theorists who had 1 and 2 but didn't have 3. I'm looking at you, Carl Jung. Okay. So different theorists have possessed different amounts of those 3 qualities, which accounts for much of the differences among the theories. So if we come now more to the modern age and we look at the 1800s, we've got Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, the more individuals one has in oneself, the greater the prospect will be of one's discerning a truth. Fascinating, right? The more individuals one has in oneself, the greater the prospect will be of one's discerning a truth. Basically, the more parts you have, the more wise you are, or the more insightful you are. And then we come up to the 1890s to 1910s, and during these 2 decades, there were various multiple models of personality that dominated in both Europe and in America. William James in America, Pierre Janet in France, Max Dessoir in Germany, Frederick Myers in the UK, and now we come to Sigmund Freud. He had, of course, the id, the ego, and the superego. Now, on first blush, this appears to be a parts perspective. It appears multiple, but these were not personalities. They were just unconscious drives. And the reality was he didn't put much stock in them, actually. He just they were like a warehouse. He just shoved a bunch of stuff in there, and unknown stuff, like, oh yeah, that's where all the defective stuff is coming from. But they weren't really parts. Now, Carl Jung absolutely believed in multiplicity. He said, the so-called unity of consciousness is an illusion. We like to think we are one, but we are not. Most decidedly not. He talked about the collective unconscious, and he used a lot of, like fancy terminology, and in many ways didn't have that third component that I was talking about, the guts to really claim a parts perspective in, contemporary society when his colleagues wouldn't have necessarily gone for the idea. So we talked about it in other terms, archetypes, collective unconscious, and so forth. Now we come up to Gestalt therapy. Fritz Perls, the German psychoanalyst in the 1960s, he did something really interesting. He developed something called the empty chair technique, where he would have someone in therapy put an emotion in the chair, usually anger. Can you put your anger over there? Let your anger sit there for a bit. And then Fritz Perls would look at the empty chair and say, what do you think about this? What do you have to say? And then the person in therapy would pause for a second and then eventually start to talk and let their anger speak. And it was an incredibly productive and helpful technique. And now we get to the birth of the real parts movement, the inner child movement, which was a huge step forward in our understanding of parts. And from 1962 to 1980, there was a book that was published, Your Inner Child of the Past. Adult Children of Alcoholics was formed, and their work is largely based on the notion of the inner child. And John Bradshaw published several New York Times best-selling books on wounded inner children. Now, what's helpful about the inner child notion is that it's widely relatable. Almost everyone can tune into a wounded inner child part. It just makes so much sense. We feel it inside, like, oh yeah, I got a wounded inner kid in there. I don't know what yours is wounded about, Mine is primarily wounded about being rejected socially as a kid. Just being told I was too brash, too big, too harsh, too clueless, too selfish, too loud, and being ridiculed, ignored, rejected, isolated, having no friends to play with on the playground. And I have a wounded inner child around that, right? Which is weird now because I'm in a profession where I get all this validation and stuff. And I still sometimes sort of think, really? You'll play with me? Like you like me okay? And I have this inner child that has a really hard time believing that anyone wants to hang out with me. So anyway, we all can relate. Like every single person gets through childhood with some kind of wounded inner child, maybe multiple inner children who really have some pain in there, coming from what it was like to grow up as you, as me, as us. Again, back to that second component of self-compassion, right? The just universality of the human experience. Like we all have wounded inner parts. And note that this is a real advancement in parts work because, in the parts perspective, because the inner child isn't one-dimensional, right? The inner child is a full sub-personality, albeit young, but still a full little kid in there, right? So multi-dimensional with needs, with a voice, and with the potential for healing and growth. Now, if you look around the world today in indigenous cultures, and you just ask, like, how many is the soul? How many? There are cultures where the prevailing view is that each person has two souls or two selves in them. The Fijians, the Algonkins, the Karens. And then there's indigenous cultures where it's assumed that there are three inside each of us, three souls or three selves. The Chuchi, the Yukagir, the Ashanti, the Dahomey. And then four, the Dakotas in Native American in the United States. And seven, the Malays. Very widespread in indigenous cultures, meaning, you just let a group of people interact alone and sort of develop a culture together. And it's super common for them to come to the realization that we're not unitary inside ourselves. We have different parts that feel, behave, react in different ways. So the birth of modern parts work, I mentioned already Richard Schwartz. And what happened was he was a professor in the early 1980s at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And he was a family systems therapist. So these people, the family systems guys, they sort of say, okay, well, in a family, there's a dynamic, right? Like one kid is scapegoated, one kid's the peacekeeper, and people interact in these sort of predictable ways, right? And he was working with bulimics in inpatient and trying to help them not binge and purge so much. And he was doing this family systems work, which he really, really believed in. He was working with bulimics, working with their families, explaining the family systems that were going on in their family. And he did an outcome study to see how well this family systems therapy was reducing their binging and purging episodes. How effective was their work with bulimics and their families? And the research showed it totally wasn't. The bulimics were still binging and purging just as much. It was completely ineffective, no effect. And he was like, well, wait a second here. He didn't get it. He was blown away because he so believed in his family systems background. So he decided to talk with these bulimics to try to sort out why. Like, why did they keep binging and purging? How was this not helpful? What did they need? And he asked them questions and they talked. And he really, really listened. And he became fascinated because what happened was they began talking about these different parts inside of them. And all these bulimics seemed to have the same parts. These parts inside of them fought with each other, protected each other. They sounded, to Richard Schwartz's ears, a lot like a family system. There was the part that wanted the binge, the food indulger that was like, I just want to go binge. And Richard Schwartz would say, well, what does that part say? And it's like, I just can't take this anymore. And I need the food now. And I feel like I'm going out of my head. And the food will make it better. And then there's another part inside that says, no, don't binge. Like, you're on your plan. You got to stick with it. And the food controller would come in, and the food indulger and the food controller would war with each other. And then it would come out that really what they were doing is protecting a wounded child part that was really triggered and heard about something. So he heard these parts, the inner critic part, battling with the binge part. The binge part was trying to protect a vulnerable part. It was predictable. And once they were addressed, like talked to directly and said, what do you feel? What do you think? What are you thinking about this? Do you want to talk to me? Tell me your perspective. The parts had a lot to say. They had a lot to say. It was like they'd been ignored for so long, and they were so glad to finally get their voice. And then, after they'd said their piece, they relaxed. And at that point, in a therapy session, the essence of the client would emerge. And Richard Schwartz called it the self, not a part, the self. The highest self, the authentic self. And internal family systems was born. Family systems not in our family, but inside of us, the family of parts that we all hold. And internal family systems, as a perspective, as a psychological perspective, recognizes that the self is an aspect of the mind that can be accessed and developed into a leader of the parts. It's the self that indeed brings balance to all the other parts. And the parts come to trust the self and want her to be in charge. They want guidance, they want direction, they want leadership, they want reassurance. They want good parenting. So internal family systems is the most mature of the modern parts perspectives. It's certifying therapists and coaches around the world. It's right up there with cognitive behavioral therapy in being extremely evidence-based. They publish a huge literature doing studies all the time. And it's so interesting, like in Bright Line Eating Land, that it emerged from work with bulimics. So that's the history. And I want to segue here for a second. This won't take long, but of course I am a neuroscientist. So I want to share with you for a second what the neuroscience has to say about all this. Because we can look in the brain now. What does it show when we look at the brain? Do we have one mind? Do we have many minds? What happens when we look in there, right? Are you curious? So there's a long history of this. In 1959 to 1967, a series of studies was done called split brain research. What they did was they took the brain and they basically sawed it in half. No joke. Why? Because people had epilepsy, intractable epilepsy that was ruining their lives anyway. It was spreading throughout their brains and causing grand mal seizures multiple times a day. These people couldn't function at all. And what they realized was if someone was having grand mal seizures that were spreading through the brain at a certain rate, if you at least severed the corpus callosum, which is the connector highway, superhighway of nerves that connects the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere of the brain, if you cut it down the middle, then the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere can't talk to each other and the epilepsy can't spread. Now, what you do then is you literally create two brains inside of one head, which it turns out has some interesting implications, but it does stop the epilepsy from spreading. literally severing the brain in two, cutting the corpus callosum. And what they found, they didn't expect this at all, was that the left hemisphere, it turns out, is really happy. The left hemisphere harbors our good moods, our feelings of well-being and flourishing, and our right hemisphere is pretty depressive and sad, sometimes bordering on suicidal, no joke. Now, Michael Gazzaniga is probably the most famous and influential neuroscientist who ever lived. I got to meet him once. I was hugely honored. After a talk he gave at the University of Rochester, got to talk with him for a little while. And we talked, I asked him, some questions about just basic, probably dumb questions he's answered a million times. I said, what's the most interesting thing you've discovered about the brain? And what he said is that consciousness is so distributed throughout the brain. We really have so many selves inside of us. And his work helped us to discover the left hemisphere interpreter, which is this part of the left hemisphere that's running this dialogue, interpreting everything in terms of us, like what it means in terms of our own experience. And what he said is, we've moved toward the idea of a plethora of systems. We no longer think of the brain as being organized into two conscious systems at all, but into multiple dynamic mental systems. The brain is very much multiple. And then, if you look at artificial intelligence, from the words of Marvin Minsky, the co-founder of MIT's Artificial Intelligence Lab, a single computer program can't mimic any form of intelligence. What's needed are many specialized programs, many specialized agents for different jobs. And when we join these agents in societies in certain very special ways, this leads to intelligence. In other words, even when they create computers mimicking intelligence, they can't do it from a mono-mind perspective. That framework doesn't produce any form of intelligence at all. You have to go parts in order to produce intelligence. Fascinating. Now, the food addict knows that there are parts, right? Because there's a part of us that wants to eat and a part of us that feels a bit like this hand on the hippie guy over there about the eating, right? Like, you got to come on already about this eating. We got to cut it out. The food indulger and the food controller are parts that every food addict instantly identifies with. Honestly, probably everybody in our society identifies with that, right? Who doesn't want to eat a little more and then simultaneously want to stop eating at the same time? So the point of all this is that the parts paradigm serves you. It serves you. It's helpful. And here's why, and this is what ties this entire lecture together. The path to genuine self-compassion. Remember what I said, like that gap of like, yeah, self-compassion is great. I want resilience. I want emotional intelligence. I want personal growth. I want everything self-esteem would give me and then some, like the ability to be resilient in the face of adversity and emotional situations. But how do I develop self-compassion when, frankly, I'm really mean to myself in my own head? How do I do it? Trying harder doesn't get me there. And here's where the parts paradigm comes in. This is the brilliant leap. Okay, this is it. You ready? You've been listening now for over an hour, and it's right here. The path to genuine self-compassion is like this. It's living in your highest self. And why does that do the trick? Because when you're in your highest self and you think of all the rest of that stuff as parts, and you understand them and you personify them and you ask them questions and you talk to them, the highest self naturally feels compassion for all those inner parts, just like you naturally feel compassion for a friend who's hurting and behaving maybe not so great, but it's so easy to have self-compassion for them because you relate to their humanity so much, and they're so clearly worthy of your compassion. That's how you start to relate to your parts. The part of you that wants to swoop in and feed you some comfort food at the end of a really long, stressful week. You feel compassion for that part, for offering that potential solution, even though your highest self knows it to be a not helpful option to eat that stuff at the end of that week. You start to really get, oh, honey, you're just trying to help. You're trying to make me happier. You're trying to relieve some stress. So we come now to the present day. This is me and Everett Considine, maybe the first time we met. That's it, I believe, the second or the first. Is that the first, Everett? You'll have to mention. The first family reunion. Everett is internal family systems certified. He's a bright lifer. He works bright line eating, and he's been working with our tribe since 2015. And what he's done is sheer genius. He's taken his background in IFS and the history of parts work, and he's combined it with these hundreds, maybe now thousands of hours that he's put into helping and serving bright lifers, and he's created the Bright Line Eating Parts Map, which is the definitive map, because we're so predictable. Human conditions are not that varied. He's created the map of the parts that are active as we live our bright line eating journey. And now I'm going to turn it over to Everett to present the bright line eating parts map to us.
All right.
So, Everett.
Wow, I love that presentation.
Yeah, I know. You've seen it before, but yep, I presented it at the family reunion last year.
Yeah, and I think I was at the second one.
The second one? That was the second?
Yeah, that is where we met, and then we launched our course the following year.
Yeah, totally.
And so let me give me a second here to...
Yeah, so Everett's going to present the Bright Line Eating Parts Map. Woo, woo, woo.
All right. Having just a little glitch here. Give me a second. Hey, Susan, why don't you chat for a minute while I figure out what's going on here?
It's possible. Do you have it browsed by an individual window? The setup slideshow thing? Is it PowerPoint? Okay. So you know what's interesting is, and I'll just expand my screen here for a second. I was lucky. I had a mom and a dad who usually didn't use harsh language with me and were pretty kind people, kind to me. And even though I was a hellion and I gave them all kinds of reasons to be, you know, especially during my teenage years, oh my goodness. But I also came to the bulk of, so I came to adulthood without as extreme inner critics as some people have. And then I got clean and sober, and I did, you know, boy, I've worked the 12 steps, I don't know, 13 times in 5 different 12-step programs. And I did maybe 20 years of therapy. So I got to this bright line eating journey, you know, kind of knowing how to be pretty kind to myself, having quite a bit of self-compassion. And I'll be honest, the hardest part for me of coaching people in bright line eating has been when I encounter folks who have really, really wicked inner critics. Because I just feel like, oh, be nice to my sweet friend. talk to her that way? Like, oh, they're talking to themselves in this way that I just want to protect them. I just want to go, oh, don't talk to yourself that way. Like, oh, you're sweet and dear. Don't you know how much I love you? Why are you talking so meanly to yourself? But I realized, like, I haven't talked to myself that way. And so this is out of my wheelhouse. Like, it's sort of like a 5 on the susceptibility scale looking at me, you know, stashing a bowl of cookie dough under my bed so I could eat some in the middle of the night because I literally didn't think I could get to morning without eating more cookie dough because I would start to shake so violently from sugar withdrawals, and just going, I don't know how to help that girl. Like, she's she's kind of broken beyond my experience, right? That's how I think most people would look at my eating. But because I've eaten to those depths, right? I can help people who've eaten to those depths. Like, I can sit there with someone and just, yeah, relate to them to the max. And I was so grateful when Everett came on the scene and had a framework for hacking this deep need for self-compassion. And when we start to teach people parts work and about their bright line eating parts and watch the self-compassion flood in this with the same ease that that person would extend someone else self-compassion, was such a game changer. So grateful for that. So,
Hey, Susan.
Yes.
I'm going to try a little experiment because what should be happening isn't. So I'm going to try sharing my entire screen and then bringing my PowerPoint forward. And then you can tell me if that's what we're seeing.
Okay. And we'll have to get someone on the team to tell too, because I don't know. I don't necessarily see what they see.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Give it a try.
Okay. So let's try this. I'm going to share this. And then I'm going to now do this. Okay. So do you see my presentation?
Yeah, I totally do.
And you hear me?
And I hear you just fine.
Okay, good. We did it. Yay. Tech glitch overcome.
Oh my gosh, look at those cuties.
Oh, I so love these characters now.
I know, they're like, so cute. Yeah.
They are really alive.
Totally. Okay. All right, sweetheart. I'm gonna go away. I'm gonna watch.
Okay.
I can't wait to see this. Okay.
Cool.
Love you, honey. Bye.
So the BLE parts map. So Susan, I think, did a great job of introducing this. But basically, out of doing parts work, doing internal family systems with hundreds and hundreds of people, I really started to see these same parts coming up over and over and over. And I developed a lot of really useful strategies for dealing with them. And usually when I'm able to introduce this material to someone doing BLE and they're having challenges, a lot of times this material, seeing the BLE parts map itself might be a breakthrough for you. And understanding yourself and your own journey. And I'm just going to touch the parts map is small, which is good. It's good news, right? Because it feels like there's a lot of parts in there, but it's really just kind of a defined cast of characters. And the first thing I have on the parts map is authentic self, and really in an internal family systems perspective, authentic self is not a part. It is not a part. It is who you are. At your core, it's your highest self. It's who you are when your parts aren't triggered, when your protective parts aren't triggered, when your wounded parts aren't triggered. And I'm going to talk more about how you can tell when you're in authentic self. The inner critic so relates to this talk, right? Because that's typically the voice that is being uncompassionate with yourself. And so the inner critic is work that almost everyone on planet Earth needs to do. And really you need to do it if you're interested in self-compassion. The isolator was a part that showed up a little bit later in the game for me. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's also a really key part in getting the support you need. The food controller, which Susan has now, referred to a couple of times, and that's really the part of us that is trying to control our eating. And and then there's the food indulger, and that's the part of us that wants to eat for a variety of reasons. And then there's the wounded child. And and obviously this is a simplification, but it's a really effective simplification. Kind of what the wounded child is are those parts of us that are hurt still, our wounds. And many of us are wounded parts or children, but not necessarily. They don't. We can be wounded at any time in life. So the authentic self is also really the centerpiece of internal family systems. And it's one of the things that kind of separates it from other theories of multiplicity, is this concept or this idea that we have actually a unitary core, that we have an essence that has all these positive qualities, that when we're in our authentic self, our highest self, we feel calmness, we feel confidence, we feel curiosity, we feel creativity, we feel clarity, we feel courage, we feel compassion, we feel connectedness. And you might recognize this as kind of a flow state. That place when you just are just in the flow and everything's feeling great. Maybe it's where you go when you're on vacation, or you can take a little break from your life. But the authentic self and becoming more and more connected and cultivating these qualities is a big part of the work we do in internal family systems. And to do your BLE program from your authentic self is an inherently kind and nurturing experience. Whereas doing your BLE program kind of between the battle between the food controller and the food indulger, for many of us, that's the crazy, that's the white knuckling. That's when, having a food plan can feel really challenging. So where the point of doing parts work and starting to get to know and love these parts is actually so that we can start to center more and more from our authentic self. And we can have that beautiful piece. And obviously, if you're it's something that also makes IFS. So IFS is internal family systems. So when I refer to IFS and parts work, they're all kind of interchangeable. But the sense of an authentic self really also kind of matches with those of us that are spiritually oriented or have religions that talk about the soul. And so it's one of the things that makes, even though IFS is really grounded in science and really comes out of, kind of amazing academia, it also has a spiritual feel to it. So many of us that are kind of spiritually oriented are kind of attracted to IFS because of that. And it's another way of deepening our connection to spirit. The isolator came kind of, initially when I was working with BLE people, it was a lot of inner critic work. And then as I started to realize that most anyone who's having challenges with BLE is having challenges because they're not plugging into this huge support system that Bright Line Eating has. Where you get buddies and mastermind groups and listen to calls, and so I started to get really curious about why people weren't reaching out, and I discovered this part that I call the isolator, and this is the part that helps avoid shame by keeping our addictions secret. This is the part that keeps you from reaching out for support, so the indulger can function without shame. A lot of isolators are trying to keep us from feeling shame. It helps you remain invisible sometimes by keeping you overweight. That's something that I've run into over and over. Is people start to lose weight to a certain point, and then they freak out. And really what that freaking out is their isolator starting to realize that people are going to start giving them attention if they lose any more weight. So sometimes our isolator is the part that's keeping us overweight. Also an isolator, my isolator is very much like this, keeps you from creating accountability so your actions can remain unseen. I remember, I think it was the first family reunion that I spoke at, I jokingly said that I had enough personal power to create a life with almost zero accountability. And it was horrible because I couldn't get myself to do most things because I had no accountability. And it's probably why I have such good insight about the isolator. But my isolator had gotten rid of all the accountability in my life. And to do things that are hard, or to deal with addictions, we usually need accountability. The isolator is the part that whispers in your ear that you don't belong and that others are judging you, right? If you're someone that feels like when you're in a group that you don't belong, there's a part that's actually telling you that. And sometimes it's an isolator that's just trying to keep you alone. So it has these different strategies to keep you alone. Sometimes your isolator tells you that others cannot be trusted and you are only safe alone. And I've done other talks for the BLE community around the isolator, and it's, for you to start to notice your isolator can really help you to start to see these strategies and get to know this part, can really help you to start to reach out. If you wonder why you don't reach out for support, this is why, because of your isolator. And so the isolator is a really important part to know on your BLE journey. So the food controller, right? Our food controllers love BLE, right? Because it's so controlled. And so our food controller is the part of us that's controlling our diet. Sometimes it's a food and exercise controller, probably before you ran into BLE, where you had exercise as part of your strategy for weight loss, which was largely ineffective for most of us. The food controller is the part of you that has you go on a diet, that tells you shouldn't be eating that, has you make the healthy choice. And some of the different flavors of food controllers are the rational one, right? I think most of us now, our food controllers have a literal encyclopedia of knowledge about food and diet and every kind of diet and keto and low carb. And we've just all done it, right? We have this very rational wealth of knowledge. Sometimes our food controllers are health oriented, right? In a tracksuit, knowledgeable and encouraging, and that's what we're hoping. Wouldn't it be nice to have a knowledgeable and encouraging food controller? But many of us have perfectionistic food controllers instead that say we must do everything perfectly. And guess what happens when we don't do everything perfectly? The food controller turns into a really strong critic. Some of us have a food controller that purges, right? Like that's the part of us that will just throw up the food that it doesn't want us to have in our body. Many food controllers are punishing and harshly critical. Sometimes we have a food controller that just kind of puts all our food onto autopilot and takes all the joy out of it. And maybe that's effective for a while, but it's probably not sustainable, and it's definitely not your highest self. Your highest self wants you to be nourished by your food. And so this is the food controller. And, each of us has a food controller, and these are just some of the kind of archetypes. So as I go through these different parts, just kind of notice for yourself, if you've not run into this information before, what is your food controller like? Right? Like you can do an exercise and draw your food controller, like focus on its motivation, start to get to know it. You can actually dialogue with it and talk with it. So that's the food controller. The indulger, the ever famous indulger, right? That most of us who have issues with weight and food know very well. And, and basically our indulger is the part of us that wants to eat off plan if we have a plan. Um, and some of the different archetypes are the loving mother, right? Like, does your indulger tell you that you deserve a treat? Right. This is really common with people that have really strong caretaking parts that are, in service and exhausted at the end of the day. They'll have their indulger will tell them that they deserve to, you deserve a treat. The impulsive child, is your indulger just reach out and grab food when you see it? Right? Many of us have an impulsive child indulger, and wow, what is that like in a food environment like we live in now, where literally every time you check out of a store, there is every kind of sweet treat that you could possibly want just staring at you as you stand in line, right? How many of our impulsive childs are activated in that moment? The seductive rationalizer, right? This is when our indulger is it comes up with good rationales for breaking the plan, right? And a lot of times the seductive rationalizer is the slippery slope, right? It's like, oh, just a little bit extra here, this little bit doesn't matter, and then pretty soon uh, the impulsive child or the loving mother has like stepped into the scene. The oblivionator, I think I created that word just because it's so cool. The binger, right? Many of us who struggle with their weight know that we have a binging part, and the interplay between the food controller and the indulger really can drive binging, and that's something that in my work we do a lot of focus on understanding that, and so you can understand that interplay. But if you are a binger, chances are that you have a really harsh shaming food controller, and that it's actually part of what's fueling the binging. So the oblivionator, the binger, and then the rebel, right? You can't control me, right? One of the things that happens when we have, BLE could be seen as rigid, right? We've bright lines themselves are kind of conceptually rigid, and many times when we have something, a rigid part or something rigid in our life, we naturally want to rebel against it, right? So many of us, and so if you want to have success with bright line eating and you just can't, right? Like, or even you realize, like, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to listen to those rules. That's your rebel. So if you have a strong rebel, bright line eating can be very challenging. But again, you can get to know these parts and start to unblend from them, start to disconnect from them, and start to lead more from your higher self. So the inner critic, again, is so central to self-compassion, and these inner critic types come from Jay Early's book on the inner critic, which is mentioned at the end, and which everyone should do inner critic work. And this particular book is really good, and in my work we do a lot of focus on the inner critic. But there's the perfect. So see. As I name these critics, see which one or more of these inner critics you have. So the perfectionist, right? Like that's the part that holds such a high bar for you that anything short of perfectionism is criticized. The inner controller, and just that's really almost like your food controller, right? Like that's the part of you that needs to control things. And controllers are typically very harsh when they lose control. Guilt tripper. Oh my God, that's like my big inner critic. Do you have a part that's constantly making you feel guilty, right? About hurting someone else's feelings, about saying the wrong thing, about something you did 10 years ago, something you're thinking about doing tomorrow? In my own personal work, I just learned that I've just have been really run by guilt most of my life. And so this was a very welcome realization, because now I can work on that, and I'm really transforming that. The taskmaster, right? Like, boy, in this culture, in this Western culture, right, we have a part that wants us to be productive. And it's a kind of inner critic that criticizes us when we're not. You know, are you one of those people that's so busy all the time that when you sit down to take a break, you feel guilty? Oh, there's a guilt tripper. You know, because you're not working, right? Like, that's a part that tells you you have to be working all the time. It's a type of inner critic. The underminer, right? Like, that's a kind of critic that just is, you know, you can't really do that. It just undermines you. You know, undermines your hopes, your dreams, makes you believe that, you know, other people can do those things, but you can't. You know, you might have an undermining critic. A kind of critic we call the conformist, right? Which is, this critic is silent as long as you are conforming to some particular social norm, right? Are you supposed to be a good girl? Right. But the minute you're not a good girl and start to create some conflict, this part criticizes you. Right. The conformist, you know, is a kind of critic that's wants us to conform. And then there's the, you know, the harshest inner critic called the destroyer. And, you know, and that's an inner critic that is literally trying to destroy you. It's like, it's the harshest of the inner critics. And it's a critic that believes you'd be better off um, if you didn't exist. And so that's its intention, is to try and tell you that. And wait, I want to go back and just say one of the things that we learn in this work in internal family systems is even our harshest critics, even our protectors that are have the most unhealthy strategies, that they are all trying to help. You know, you will find that each of these critics actually has a strategy of trying to help you in some way. You know, your indulger is trying to help you in some way. Your food controller is trying to help you in some way. And in this work, we actually get to know these parts. We dialogue with them, and we learn their stories. Now, I'm going to touch into the wounded child, and I'm going to talk about some different types of wounds. And I want to just, you know, this particular internal family systems kind of goes straight to the core. You know, we start dealing with our protective parts, and then suddenly our wounded parts are right there. So, you know, so I want you to just be really gentle with yourself, be very self-compassionate as I go through these harm wounds, because many of us had these wounds and have these wounds. And so these are some of the different kinds of wounds that we can get. You know, as again, usually as children, but sometimes, you know, we can be wounded any time in life. So there's the attack wound, right? I was yelled at, hit, or exposed to violence, and now I'm afraid of people's anger. Wow, I actually have that. Judgment wound. I was judged harshly and frequently, and now I feel inadequate and bad about myself. You know, and again, just as I go through these, just notice, right? These might be ways that your inner child still feels pain. The shame wound. I was publicly ridiculed and embarrassed, and now I feel ashamed of myself. The violation wound. I was intruded on, smothered, or abused. Manipulation wounds. Domination wound. I was dominated and controlled, and now I allow people to control me, or I am afraid of that happening again. Exploitation wound. I was used to meet my parents' needs. Betrayal wound. I trusted a caregiver and then was betrayed by them, and now I have a hard time trusting anyone. Guilt wound. I was repeatedly made to feel guilty about things I did, and now I can't forgive myself. Rejection wounds. Rejection wound. When I reached out for connection, I was dismissed, and now I don't expect people to like me or want me. This is what Susan was referring to when she talked about her inner child having a rejection wound. A need wound. I wasn't adequately nurtured and cared for, and now I feel empty and needy. Abandonment wound. After being taken care of for a while, I was abandoned, and now I'm afraid of being left again. Not seen wound. I was not seen and appreciated for who I am. The basic deficiency wound. Because of what happened to me, I feel that I am fundamentally flawed. Most every human being, I think that's why we call it the basic deficiency wound, has some part of them that feels fundamentally flawed. The unlovable wound. Because of what happened to me, I believe that I am not lovable. So those are just the different. Our wounds are unique to ourselves and our own experiences. So you may or may not have seen yourself in there. So if you get to know these parts, this is what I do in my work with BLE is we get to know these parts, and we do guided meditations, and we journal about them, and we draw them, and I do talks on them. We get to know these parts. You can dialogue with them. That's the thing that's so beautiful about this process is we personify our parts. We personify them so that we can relate to them like a wounded inner child. And dialogue with them, and they actually dialogue back. It's very alive, our inner world. You can journal about them. You can heal your wounded child. Now, the thing that's so powerful about this internal family systems is we actually have ways that we heal our wounded parts. And when we're able to heal our wounded parts, then the protective system that's built up around those wounds can relax. This is where a lot of the people, this is why someone, is having trouble with their BLE program, and they call me and they do a session with me, and then we do a healing on a wound, and then they're able to get right back on track because those protectors, that indulger that was trying to help them deal with that stress could now relax because the underlying pain, isn't there anymore. As we heal our parts, and that's kind of the process of the work in internal family systems is we heal our wounded parts and we get to know our protective parts, and we start to love all of them. And the more we're able to love our parts, the more natural self-compassion, we have in our system, and all those benefits that Susan was talking about that we get for self-compassion, really all those benefits come when we do internal family systems. It's like a direct correlation because internal family systems is so effective at helping us nurture and grow our self-compassion. And what Susan's going to be talking to you about, Bright Line Freedom, which is the program we developed where we explore all these parts as we work with the BLE parts map extensively. And just a little gratitude and credit. Much of my work is based on internal family systems and the work of Bonnie Weiss and Jay Early, PhD. You'll notice that I use their books in pretty much everything I teach. The View of the Inner Critic was developed by Bonnie and Jay, and they've written a beautiful inner critic book you can Google and find. And then Dick Schwartz is my mentor. He's the one that we've all learned from, who've learned internal family systems. And so you'll have the PDF will have this information if you want to be able to connect to these resources later. So let's see here, get back.
Hey.
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 You want to pick it up here?
Yeah. Let me go ahead and thank you. Perfect. So Everett just gave some credit, and I was thinking, I want to give some credit to him. So yeah, a lot of the stuff that he's talking about were theories developed by those folks, but the isolator piece, that's Everett. Through working with our tribe, he started to realize the power of the isolator and developed 14 different archetypes for the different forms that the isolator takes. And yeah, Everett Considine has pioneered, just like, his forerunners before him pioneered the work on the inner critic. He's pioneered the work on the isolator. Really powerful stuff. So yeah, it's amazing to see him work with our tribe and bring this stuff to life. I want to, I have another little PowerPoint here that I want to share with you really quickly. This should go right there. Perfect. Yeah. So I want to talk to you for a second about one of my closest buddies in Bright Line Eating. Her name is Dana Oliver. And we got close because we have a mutual friend that I actually went to grade school with. I shared, just it's funny because I shared recently about with you about being rejected as a kid. And our mutual friend actually wasn't my friend when we were kids. We remember each other now, and we can be friendly now. But as kids, we were not friends. She was a popular girl, and I was not. I was a rejected kid. And so it's so funny that Dana Oliver joined the Bright Line Eating Boot Camp way back in February of 2016, and she's sitting with her friend saying, "I just lost all my weight, and she's like, her friend's like, yeah, you look great. You look amazing." She's like, Susan Pierce Thompson. And doing this, her friend's like, Sue Pierce? I went to school with her. So anyway, Dana and I actually met through this really funny connection, and I got to know her. She got into a right-sized body really quickly. She's been in a right-sized body now for 3 years with Bright Line Eating. April 2016, she got into a right-sized body. And I've known her for these 3 years. And after a year at maintenance, she fell off her bright lines, and she started eating every day off plan. And every day she would think, this is the day when I'm going to get my bright lines back. And she'd be eating sugar by 11 a.m. and hating living in her body. She didn't come from big numbers. She gained back 6 pounds, but she says, I cannot tell you how much I hated living in my body with those 6 extra pounds on me and that sugar in my system, and thinking, today I'm going to have a bright day. Today's the day I'm going to get it back. And she started working with Everett, who said, during that year, you weren't so much doing Bright Line Eating as thinking about Bright Line Eating. I don't know if you can relate to that. Do you spend time thinking about doing Bright Line Eating, but not actually doing Bright Line Eating? So Dana started doing parts work right after she came to the family reunion last year in July, the end of June, early July. And starting in July, she started doing this parts work. I gave the presentation that I gave here at the family reunion. Everett gave the BLE parts map for the first time. That presentation at the family reunion, Dana took it, started working with Everett in depth, started doing the course Bright Line Freedom. And through the course Bright Line Freedom, she has had 10 months now of just about 10 months of unbroken bright lines. Those 6 pounds came right off just about immediately. And she is as happy, thin, and free as anyone I've ever met. And she today will say, yeah, when stressful situations come up, what happens is I look inside and I can see my parts getting active, and I can tell if what I need is a hug. It's not food. It's not food. I go inside and I listen to how my body's feeling. I feel the sensations. I identify the parts, and I don't want to eat anymore. I don't have to eat over stuff. And I just wanted to share that. I've seen this with Lyndon Morris Del Rio. She's another person I shared about her. She's the one who brought me to Everett in the first place. And she is now unbroken bright lines since October of 2014. coming up on 5 years of unbroken bright lines, 4.5 years now. And Lyndon, same. She does her parts work. She understands her wounded parts, loves them, gives them the attention that they need, and doesn't break her bright lines. So I just wanted to share with you, because we're offering this course again. And Everett and I have an invitation for you if Bright Line Freedom is something you might be interested in. Bright Line Freedom. Really the way we do our inner work in Bright Line Eating, because when we put the food down, all kinds of stuff comes up. You just heard about, the inner critics and all the parts that get so active when we stop medicating with food. So the purpose of Bright Line Freedom truly is to find and live from your authentic self, your highest self, that compassionate, curious, calm, confident you, me, that us that we are, to be us and live from that place. The course utilizes internal family systems, the parts work we've been talking about, and the BLE parts map that Everett just showed you. And it introduces you to those parts. It also, like Everett said, has a deeply spiritual perspective. So whether you have a religious grounding or a spiritual perspective or none at all, Bright Line Freedom, what it will do is it will take you to your value core, yours particularly. So we promise there is nothing in this course that runs contrary to your religious practices, if you have any, to your spiritual beliefs or your lack thereof. But the course will take you deep to your value core and utilize that strength, that framework that you already know and trust and love as part of your foundation. And that's part of the beginning of the course, is to shore that up and to use that in service of the work that you do in Bright Line Freedom. And in this course, you're taught how to release and let go of shame, for real, to release shame, guilt, anxiety, burdens from the past, wounds from the past, and then to discover and heal hidden emotions and buried core issues. What happens with this work is often things that were just buried or not known of will emerge all of a sudden as you're doing this work. And the work is really good at helping you to then sort of metabolize and process those core issues to make sense of them. What often happens is that we don't realize when our parts are up for us, because, we're healthy individuals by and large, right? And so our parts can blend with our natural, authentic selves so closely that we might not even know that we're acting from a part at a certain moment. This happens to me all the time. I blend with my food indulger, and Everett, I was watching your parts work, of course, and for me, it's the seductive rationalizer. That's what starts me down the path of eating, is the seductive rationalizer. It'll say, you can go to a restaurant, you don't have to bring your scale, you'll use the one plate rule. And, you don't need to tell them to leave the sauce off the fish or the dressing off the salad or anything like that. You get a fat at dinner, and that'll just be your fat. And, the one plate rule. And so the seductive rationalizer will kick in. And then from there, this is just how my food indulger works. It's like straight to the oblivionator after that. As soon as because I have like pretty high integrity, and I don't if I call bullshit on myself, pardon the swear word, what'll happen is the oblivionator will kick in and say, you're over the line, sweetheart. You know it. Come on. You know it. And then off to the races, and I dive in. Then it's just more food. That's what happens for me. So it's really interesting. And what happens though is, if I'm not careful, I'll be blended with the seductive rationalizer. It'll feel like it's just me wanting to have a good night with my husband, with my friends in a restaurant, and it feels like me. And I don't even notice that I'm blended all of a sudden with my food indulger, that seductive rationalizer. What this course helps you to do is unblend from your parts so that you can see them, when they're operating. And oftentimes that awareness is enough. Just know, oh, there we go. There's my food indulger creeping in. And suddenly that perspective can be enough to shift it right there. And it can be enough to bring in self-compassion. What I've noticed is that my food indulger comes up when my stress bar is higher than my support bar. So I've got stress in my life, and the food indulger comes in to fill that gap. Like you say, Everett, you taught me that. It was one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard. When the stress bar is higher than the support bar, stress being, we know what stress is, support being all the things, a good night's sleep, enough social support, enough prepped food in the fridge, the emails processed, the laundry done, enough conversation, human connection, all that. When the stress bar gets higher than the support bar, the food indulger wants to make it a little easier by offering some food as a solution. And I can have compassion for that perspective, right? I can totally have compassion. Now, I just want to quickly refresh you of the benefits of self-compassion, because like Everett said, these are the benefits of doing this work. These are the benefits: freedom from depression, freedom from anxiety. Now, I can't promise all depression and all anxiety melt away, right? Remember that self-compassion accounts for 1/3 to 1/2 of depression and anxiety. So, that's quite a bit of relief. Increased emotional resilience, increased emotional intelligence, personal growth. And the course itself offers a clear, comprehensive roadmap and a wonderful mix of methods. And I'm going to turn it over to Everett now to share some of the details, because he is the primary instructor for the course. So I want him to share with you some of the particulars of how it gets delivered. So Everett, are you there to do that?
Yeah, let me do my little jig here again.
Your little hack. You figured out how to.
Okay, so we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. Ha! Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, totally.
Okay. So this is just an overview of the structure of the course. So what to expect. So this is a 15-week course, and it's being delivered through online video and audio content in very similar ways if you've done other Bright Line Eating courses, because it's the Bright Line Eating team that's put this all together. You're going to learn a lot about your authentic self and how to recognize it and cultivate it. You're going to learn about the BLE parts map and how to work with the parts of you that are activated in your BLE journey. And this was a great introduction, and we're going to go very in depth. And then you're going to learn something really amazing, which is how to do an IFS session. And if you've listened to any of my sessions, you can see what that's like. But you're going to learn how to be able to do parts work either by yourself. I do a lot of guided meditations in the course, so you can just listen to those guided meditations, and I guide you through a process of dialoguing with your parts and learning about them. You can journal. You can learn the process and actually just do it yourself, like a kind of self-guided meditation. And you also are going to have an opportunity to work with a peer. So you might guide yourself through an IFS session, a parts work session, and be witnessed by a peer. Or once people have got enough of a skill set, you might even be guided by a peer through an IFS session. And that's really what I'm teaching. And those are just the touch point, the high level, right? The required reading for the book is, and if you don't take the course and you just want to learn more about this information, these are great books to get. Introduction to Internal Family Systems Model by Richard Schwartz. That's the best intro. And then Self-Therapy. And Self-Therapy is really, really well named. right? Because it teaches the IFS process in a way that you can either do by yourself or with a peer. And optional reading is there's a workbook that goes along with self-therapy that I recommend, but you don't need it. And I talk a little bit about that in the intro video. You can decide whether to get it. And then this amazing book, It's Not Always Depression, which I really just touch into at the very end of the course. But it's also a great book to get and read if you want to learn more about parts work. The 15 weeks is broken into 3 sections, right? So 15 weeks, this is in depth. And we've broken it into 3 5-week sections. And basically they're broken into these ways. The first section is understanding IFS, internal family systems, and the BLE parts map. So the first 5 weeks is very analytical, and there's a lot. You're going to be learning the IFS model of the psyche and learning all about how the BLE parts map relates to you. And then the second third of the course, we start to move into an experiential process where you're going to learn how to work with your protective system and your protectors, the parts of you that are trying to protect you. And then as we start to move into the second part of the course, we start to get experiential. So we kind of come out of the head and start to get experiential. And then by the time we hit the third part of the course, you'll have a lot of grounding in IFS in both the theory and the experiential part of it. And then we're going to start healing, loving, and transforming our wounded parts. So we don't really get to the stuff that can be kind of heavy, right? Which touching into our wounds can be kind of heavy. We get to that towards the end of the course. So those are the 3 sections. And each 5-week section has got 4 weeks of content. So every Monday you're going to get a video audio lesson. They're video, but there's an audio version, so you can listen to it like a podcast. And then every Friday I'll be doing either a live Q&A or a witness parts work session. And then on the 5th week, we don't have any more content, so it's a catch-up week. We learned in the BLE courses that people really like catch-up weeks. And so we built that into the structure here. So you can catch up on the last 4 weeks or take the week off, but I also deliver a bonus webinar on that week. Now, for people, so there's going to be weekly exercises to help integrate the material. And there's going to be 3 kinds of exercises for people that are new to the material. And then I'm going to have special exercises. I think a lot of people are going to be reviewing the course and taking it again. And since they've already learned the material once, we can go a little bit deeper in terms of exercises. And then also, if people want to use Brightline Freedom as a resuming place, if your lines have been shaky and you want to jump into this course with us and use it to resume and tighten up your program, every week I'm going to have special exercises for people that are doing resuming. And I'll be talking about parts, for resumers. So, and then here's the calendar, just a little example of the calendar again. The course is launching on Monday the 13th. We're having a kickoff call, but you'll have access to a calendar where you'll be able to see, when things are. And then, live sessions and online support. For the bi-weekly Q&As, you'll be able to send questions in ahead of time like you do in other BLE coaching scenarios. And then I'm going to be doing live witness parts work sessions. So I put out a lot of recorded parts work sessions, but I'm actually going to be doing these live in front of a group. And I may do it with multiple people sometimes. So I'm kind of excited about this new format. I've never really done it this way before, but I think it's going to be great for teaching. And then we will have, of course, because it's Brightline Eating, we're going to have a Facebook group where you'll be able to share about lessons, ask questions, find buddies and mastermind groups, do an introduction, and come out of isolation. And so this is my little note at the end. Remember, you will get out of this course what you put into it. So so that's pretty good overview of the structure. then I'm going to hand it back to you, Susan.
Yeah, totally. All right. So we're going to open it up for Q&A here in a second, but there are essentially two ways to do this work. You could hire Everett personally to take you through it. That's a $12,000 package, and he'll take you through the work that he just presented to you right there. Or you can enroll in Brightline Freedom in the group course. And instead of $12,000, it's $997 for the 15-week course, like a full college semester course. You can also do 3 payments of $367, monthly payments. First one today and then one a month for 2 more months. Now, if you're a Bright Lifer, you of course get a discount. So it'll be $897 for you, 3 payments of $327. And if you're a Bright Lifer, don't register here on this webinar. Go to your Bright Lifer's website. Go to your Bright Lifer's website and click on the banner at the top where you can register for Brightline Freedom there, right in your Bright Lifer's website, lifers.brightlineeating.com. So the course is starting on Monday, the 13th. It's starting. And when it finishes, 15 weeks later, you will get to keep the materials for 6 more weeks to do as much, 6 more months to do as much catch up as you want. So you could go through the course essentially 2 more times on your own after that. So I invite you to register. Look over on the right-hand side. Everett and I invite you to register for Brightline Freedom. We have had, what did Jeannie say? How many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of testimonials did we get from the first time we ran this course? People love this course. It helps them live happy and thin and free like nothing else. Doing the inner work in this format is the key. So we invite you to go ahead and register. You can click over here on the right where you see, and it says register now. Register now, right over there on the right. And I also want to mention there is a 100% money back guarantee for 30 days. 100% money back guarantee. So you can kick the tires, you can try it out, you can see how the instruction works for you, you can see how it's feeling for you, how helpful it is. What I find is that Everett's work is incredibly effective, incisive, and efficient. You will know well before 30 days whether this is working for you. It's very powerful stuff. It's powerful medicine. And we invite you to join us. We invite you to join us. And I know that we have people here, right here in the audience, on here who have done Brightline Freedom. And I'm going to go ahead and you can ask them if you want to ask them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the chat thread so that we can answer your questions. Go ahead if you're going to ask a question. I want you to please try to mark it as a question. And Everett, if you want to come back on camera too, we can both answer questions. Just be sure to mark it as a question, which if you hover over it and then click to mark it as a question, as you're typing it in, hover and then find where you can mark it as a question. That will be really helpful for us. And go ahead and ask questions. Like, we are here to answer your questions. Yay. All right. So let me see if we have any questions coming in. Susie wants to know, do we purchase the books independently? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you do. And can they get them on Amazon, Everett? Or are they just super easy to get?
I have links. I send out links. So yeah, okay. I think the Dick Schwartz one you can't get on Amazon. You have to get it from their company. But Jay's book is on Amazon. Okay.
Catherine has a question, which we always get when we offer a course. Can we do this at the same time as the boot camp? Catherine, are you in the boot camp right now? Have you already started it? And I ask that because if you have, you probably have a sense of how much extra time you have, how much bandwidth you have. The question is really not so much, can you do them at the same time? There's no reason you couldn't, except for time and sort of inner space to do the work. which I would imagine for these two courses, which are two very transformative, involved courses, you would probably only have the bandwidth to do them both at the same time if you were retired with no kids living at home and didn't work full time. If you had maybe only part time or something like that, yeah, that would be my guess. What do you think about that, Everett? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's based on time. I mean, some people are retired and home and don't, you know what I mean? Like, got plenty of time, and so if you were in that scenario, you would kind of know yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, but if you're pressed for time or the boot camp already feels like it's too much, or I would do the boot camp first.
Jan wants to know, who was it you cited as writing about the isolator? That's Everett. Everett
That's
is
me.
the world's leading expert, the authority on the isolator. Yeah, totally. Patricia comments, Brightline Freedom is the missing piece of Brightline Eating and vice versa. Totally. A couple people, Everett, are saying that they're going to be on vacation for a week or two. Someone right away when the course starts until the 18th, and someone for 2 weeks in June, Sally for 2 weeks in June, and then Mary is on vacation. How does that work, Everett? That's fine, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Some people do the course at their own pace, right? Some people are all in and they want to keep up, and so they do, and and you can use that catch-up week to stay caught up if you get behind.
Yeah.
But some people you can do the course literally at your own pace. Some people don't have the time to do it every week, so maybe they do a lesson every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks and move through it slower.
And all the materials are recorded, so you can pull from them. So like when you get back from vacation, like remember there's a catch-up week, right? So right away in that first month, there's going to be a week off anyway. So you can, then pace how you go through the materials. It'll be fine. It'll be totally fine.
Yeah. And it's fine, right? Someone says, I haven't done a BLE boot camp. There's a lot of BLEers who haven't done boot camps. I mean, people do it 14-day challenges and do it from the book. And I mean, probably someone needs to be interested in BLE to really get a lot out of this course. To me, that's really the criteria, is that you want to know those BLE parts, right? And why would you want to know those parts unless you were doing Brightline Eating?
Right, totally. Or some kind of food thing, right? I mean, it wouldn't really have to be Brightline Eating, would it? You'd have to be committed to a path of healthy eating.
Yeah, we had people in the last class that had other food plans that they were doing, and it was just as helpful, right?
Yeah, you should know that you were invited to this webinar consciously. So Everett and I had a talk. So I was like, Everett, what do you think? Should we just invite boot campers? Because we can do that. We know who in our system has taken the boot camp, and we could have just invited boot campers. We invited the entire Brightline Eating, community, meaning anyone who's basically on our email list, because Everett's like, you really don't have to be formally a Bright Lifer or in the boot camp or having done the boot camp. I mean, really, even anyone who's interested in healthy eating could do this and get
well. And I got some really useful feedback too, that some people that are so wired already in their program, right? Like they're in right-sized bodies, their food is not an issue, but they love the fact that they could use these tools to work on any area of their life.
Oh, right, totally.
Right. So food is kind of wired for them, and so maybe it's relationship stuff, or maybe it's something else that they want to focus on. But the tool set is broad. It's broad. You can really use it to kind of heal anything that's going on.
I think I shared with you over dinner. Everett and I had dinner in Maui last month, where Everett lives now. By the way, we got to go to his home. My husband and I got to go to his home. So sweet. And I think I was sharing with you that I had a huge, huge advancement forward in my spiritual life through parts work. When I realized that I have this part that maybe I'll call the moralizer, that whispers to me as if it's my highest self saying, that's not God's plan for you. That's not the straight path. And it was almost like an inner critic, like as if I was impure, unchaste, unholy, like not whatever it was, right? And I believed it was almost like a little this kind of like the kid who thinks they're going to be struck by lightning because they've, whatever, or, and I thought that that part was my highest self. And when I had the awareness, no, that's a part. I have a very puritanical, moralistic part of me that thinks that the line is that narrow. And if I'm not towing it, the divine bounties are maybe about to be cut off. And I thought it was, the relief and freedom when I realized that's a part. It's very similar to the food controller. You might think you're doing your bright line eating program when your knuckles are this white and your food's been this perfect. And it's like, that's not actually what bright line eating at its best feels like. There's nothing white knuckly about it at all. It's very easy flowing and very natural. So anyway, yes, you can totally use this to benefit all kinds of things, relationships, your spiritual life, your whatever, all kinds of things.
And there's a question or comment here from Catherine. She says, I'm not on BLE yet, so you'll be offering this course again soon. You can take the course if you haven't started BLE yet. Like if you're watching this webinar, you can take this course, and you have 30 days to really figure out like whether it's what you wanted or not.
Yeah.
But, and I'm hoping actually that we may get some people that are wanting to resume and get back on track and kind of use this 15 weeks as a container, right? Because it's so powerful to have a course, right? To like get you refocused on your lines. And so wherever you are on your BLE journey, whether you're just thinking about it and haven't been able to get going yet, or you're in it or you're well into it, everyone's welcome.
Yeah, totally. Carmen just signed up. So excited. I believe this is the missing link to my success. Welcome, Carmen. It might be. It has been for so many people I've seen. Debbie Richards wants to know, when will it be offered again? So here's the thing, Debbie. We don't have it on the calendar again. We don't know. We believe it will be offered again, but I'm just realizing, and with sort of chagrin, I offered Brightline Mind 2 years ago, and people said, when will you offer it again? And I said, oh, for sure next year, I'm sure. I don't think this year again. And now it's 2 years have gone by. It's not on the docket to be offered. It wasn't offered for the rest of 2017, any of 2018, and now it's not going to be offered again for 2019. So I just want to say, I don't know. We don't have it on a specific date for it again. We hope and trust this is a course that we'd like to offer ideally twice a year, minimally once a year, but we have no plans to offer it again in 2019, and we don't have it on the calendar for 2020. So I don't mean that to scare you or Everett. I know you want to offer the course, super often and stuff. I'm just saying, like, this is the reality of like,
that's the reality, right?
Things,
yeah.
And Brightline Mind needs to be launched, and Reboot Resume needs to be launched, and the boot camp needs to be launched. And we can only do so many launches with our team. We have one staff that, so just so you know, this is almost for sure your last time to take it in 2019, and we don't know when it will be offered in 2020. So, but we don't know. I mean, all I can say is we don't have it on the calendar again. And Serafina wants to know, how long do we have to register for the course? Well, it starts on Monday, and you want to get your books. So, you need to register pretty soon. Amelia says, I'm not seeing a way to sign up on the Bright Lifers website. Where or when is the link? I've been hearing about this course ever since I became a Bright Lifer. Amelia, that's interesting. Let me see if Tara Bogdan can help. Where's the link on the Lifers site? I'm just texting her. It should be a big banner across the top. But we will get back to you as soon as I hear from my team. I am not the tech staff. Thank Everett, you could be tech staff, which is funny because you're the one who had the hard time.
I know. God, so, but I kept my cool.
Catherine says, hello, great presentation. I'm just writing to get the chat activated since I can't see it yet. Thanks. That's funny. Kathy says, I signed up and the course materials is not giving me any info or links to order the books. Everett, can you speak to that for Kathy? She's already in the course. Holy
Yeah,
smoke.
cool. Yeah, there's a resources page once you're in the website that
A
it's got the information for the books. So
beautiful.
yeah, yeah, and if anything isn't there now, it will be very soon.
Got
So
it.
maybe wait till tomorrow.
Okay. So, Amelia, what my team is saying is if you just go to the Bright Lifers website, lifers.brightlineeating.com, and you're signed in there as a Bright Lifer, lifers.brightlineeating.com, you're signed in. There's a big banner at the top of the homepage to register for Brightline Freedom.
She found it.
So I hope that helps. Oh, she found it. Okay. Got it. Yep, you're welcome. And Martin mentioned a PDF with a list of the books mentioned. Where can Martin find that?
Yeah, so the replay will have links to our slides.
Yes.
And so the slides will have information about the books that we mentioned.
So Martin, watch your email after this. Watch your email because there'll be a link to a replay. We'll have a replay page with the webinar up there and then links to, the PDFs of the slides that were shown and a resources page. Verna. Oh, Verna, my dear. She says the isolator is and has always been in full control since my first memory in life. I don't belong to the point that when I lost my job of 22 years from cutbacks in 2015, I haven't worked since. So I can't afford this or any other form of assistance or counseling. The 14-day challenge is the best I've been able to afford. Oh, Everett, I know both of our hearts are bleeding for her. Do you have a suggestion for her to get some assistance?
Yeah, I mean, she should just call support, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of talk about what's going on with her.
Yeah, reach out to my team, Verna, support.brightlineeating.com. And also, there is a book, Self Therapy, the main book that Everett recommends, where you can do this work on yourself. Self Therapy. That's by Jay Early, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, Self Therapy by Jay Early. All right.
I like that.
Yeah, go ahead, Everett.
Oh, would there at some point be a condensed version of the course for self-study? Well, that kind of is self-therapy. So,
the book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and also there's a real big difference between learning about your parts and learning the theory and actually learning the experiential process of parts work. And you really can't learn it from a book. You really can't. That's why the videos, the in-person, even though I'm not live with you, I'm taking you through experiential processes, and for a lot of people, that's kind of the hidden side of internal family systems because all they've ever interacted with is books, mm-hmm. And then they do a training that's like my training, and they start to get introduced to the experiential aspect of IFS, and like something much deeper and more profound opens up.
So Serafina signed up, and Beth says, I told my isolator to shut up, and I signed up. Okay, so funny. Thanks for the chuckle. And Catherine says, I'm really thinking about it. I've loved Everett's witnessed parts work sessions on the audio. My highest self always sleeps on big decisions. And my moralizer part thinks that this is a lot to spend on just me when the planet is in trouble and there are so many people in the world who have basic survival needs.
Oh my God, I have so much to say about that. Heal yourself. If you want to help this planet, heal yourself. Become, heal yourself. And invest in yourself. I mean, we can, Susan, we can say really dramatic things. People say very dramatic things about Bright Line Freedom, that it's life-changing, it changed everything. I mean, I don't even like to say it because it sounds kind of unbelievable to talk in that way, but
yeah, it sounds snake oily, but it's true.
but it's it's a very consistent message from people that do this work, because you actually are learning a completely new way to relate to yourself that includes self-compassion, right? So all the benefits that Susan's been talking about are you get them, right? And that really is life-changing. And so yeah, but I understand too. I've got like caretaking parts that didn't want me to focus on myself for a long time.
Yeah. It's interesting, Catherine. It's like if you really take to heart the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It becomes really clear that if the planet is in distress, if people have needs, you are morally obligated to show up as your highest self in any and all situation that you can, so that you can do your part in bringing solutions to the world. Like, it does not serve the world if we're eating. It does not serve, eating addictively, hiding in a corner. It does not serve the world if we're triggered, if we're angry, if we're judgmental, if we're resentful, if we're hating ourselves, if we're not letting our light shine. If I didn't do my work, I couldn't be bringing any of this to you. I would be thinking, who am I to offer a webinar and offer a course and get online and share information with people? Who am I to write a book? Who am I to employ people? Right? It's like the people who are helping have done their inner work, and we're bringing healing to the world. Join us, do the work. Otherwise, you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Yeah, Heather says, I've done 2 of 3 sessions with Everett. Could I still benefit? Yes. Oh my God, this is so much more than doing session work with me. I mean, it's nice to do session work with me, and we can, we'll spend a few hours working on things. But this is like 30 hours with me. I mean, this is, yeah. You'll get a lot more benefit than one-on-one session work with me doing this course.
Yeah, totally. So Catherine says, I registered, but I haven't gotten an email. Who can I contact if I don't get a validation email? You go to support.brightlineeating.com. That's the support center, support.brightlineeating.com. Sometimes it does happen, especially if you have a Hotmail or a Comcast account, or it could be something else, but even our program delivery email sometimes won't get through on certain, they block the email. So yeah, go to support.brightlineeating.com. Yeah.
And Bobby, I love your question. Would there be at some point a condensed version of the course for self-study? I just imagine you having this really strong taskmaster that wants you to like absorb things really fast, and maybe an isolator that wants you to do it by yourself. So yeah. Yeah, a lot of this course is about helping people come out of isolation. BLE itself is about helping people come out of isolation. And we spend a lot of focus on helping people work with their isolators so they can reach out and connect into the Brightline Freedom community, but also into the larger Brightline Eating community. And because, just like you can read the book and have whatever results you have that, or you can do a boot camp and get a buddy and get a mastermind group and listen to coaching calls, right? Like, there is a world of support that Brightline Eating offers, and this is a world of support that's focused on your inner healing.
Totally. And now, Shauna had an old question that we skipped over.
Yeah.
She wants to know, Everett, you probably know better than I do. Do we have to have the books before we start the course? Sometimes it takes a while to get them.
No, my lectures are very complete. Like, someone could probably do the course without the books, but everyone has different learning styles. So like, some people really need the books. I have some optional books. If you're really a books person, like, you can get the workbook and the main book. But you'll be fine. My lectures are very self-complete. And so.
Shauna, your comment is really interesting about the money thing. Yeah, it's interesting because when people stay on their lines, they spend 60% less on food, 30% less, 33% less on their groceries, and 90% less on restaurants. It's those like impulsive food indulger extra things that are like the most expensive things that we spend on food. It's shocking how much money people spend. Not to mention, don't get me started, but there was this George Washington University study showing that if you're obese, you spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars every year just being obese. Things you don't even think about. The extra insurance, the extra gas in the car, literally, on and on and on. Yeah, it's so expensive. Not doing bright line eating and not doing it well, not staying on your lines is so expensive in every way. Expensive to the soul, expensive to the heart, expensive to the pocketbook. Yeah.
I like Dana says, I'm resistant to journaling. Is this sit down and write your feelings for an hour? Guess what? I am totally resistant to journaling myself. I have never been a journaler. And whenever I've taken notes in any course, I've never, ever referred back to them once. And so journaling is definitely optional. You're encouraged to actually do the work experientially, but for some people, journaling works better. So instead of imagining they're dialoguing with the part, they can journal about dialoguing with the part.
I think that would be true for me. It kind of slows my mind down a little. When I write it out, I have a very idea generative mind. So if I'm not writing, it's very hard for me to stay with it would be very hard for me to talk with a part in my mind by myself, I think. But if I were journaling, it would kind of keep me on track. Yeah. Lori, clothes are a huge expense. Lori wants to know, she signed up. Will the kickoff call be recorded? Of course it will. It'll all be recorded. Yeah. Everything will be recorded. You can do it all at your own pace for sure. Beth wants to know, where's that book list again, Everett?
Say that again. Oh, it's on the website under resources. On the website. Yeah.
Website.
So that if that's not there today, I know they're working feverishly on it. It'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah. Are the books available in audio? I have vision problems.
I know self-therapy is available. I think they both are available in audio format. I'm not 100% sure about the Dick Schwartz book, but like 95% sure. And self-therapy is for sure. The Dick Schwartz book, if for some reason you couldn't get it or read it, it's just such a lovely introduction to IFS that I want everyone to read it. But I am giving you a really in-depth introduction to IFS. So if you didn't read that book for some reason, you wouldn't know less. But it's always nice to hear it from the voice of the person that developed it.
Bernice wants to know about our back-end decision making, about our calendar. Is there a reason the course wasn't offered later this year rather than so close to the last Bright Line Freedom course? Just curious. No, there isn't. Well, the reason is that we want to offer this course whenever we can. So this was like the next chance to offer it. And now the reason I'm guessing that we probably won't offer it again this year is because of all the other things we have launching this year, including my second book, which is coming out in October, which is going to require a whole big launch. And we're launching the boot camp again in September. And, before that is the family reunion in July, and on and on and on. So I'm just thinking through the calendar and thinking, I can't imagine when we would launch it again. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. And, we pour our hearts and souls into this stuff when we do it. It's not a trivial undertaking to roll out a course like this. So
that's for sure.
So it's more like this was the first opportunity, and then I'm trying to think when would be the next opportunity. That's it. Yeah. So Shelley says, I read self-therapy and did lots of my part work just knowing about Everett's BLE parts map. The difference between that and getting into Bright Line Freedom to have modules, meditations, Q&A, and more for me was an exponentially increased benefit for my self-led parts work. The social support, witnessing was an enormous benefit to me as well. Thank you for sharing, Shelley. Marvelous. hopes she can handle all this inner exploration.
Yeah, well, to me, it's the most worthy journey that we can be on. I mean, and I'm excited. Like everyone needs to be on that journey. So I'm always excited when someone new to inner work shows up because wow, you have no idea yet how much better your life can be. You have no
Mhm.
idea. Yeah, it's really profound when you're someone that does your work. Like your life just gets better. It keeps getting better your whole life if you're someone that does your work.
Yep.
And if you're not, then you just get stuck. That's what happens to people. They just get stuck.
All right. Everett, Margot has a great question. What's the biggest change you've experienced from your parts work?
I think just, I like to tell people like create the life that you want to live. And I'm really doing that now. I mean, on my website, someone mentioned IFS being like the missing piece for me. I've always said it's been the missing piece of the puzzle, that because of the way I was stuck, I always felt like I could only get to a certain level and I would just hit a certain level and never quite get beyond it. And the work I've done, the healing work I've done with IFS, and the parts healing that I've done, like allowed me to kind of take off that glass ceiling. And I used to like it. When I first came to IFS, I didn't really believe I could have what I wanted. Like I believed I could have almost what I want, or something maybe not as good. But what if I believed I couldn't have what I wanted? So I never actually went towards what I wanted, right? Because why would I? I can't have that, right? And so once I unburdened that belief and realized like, oh, I just have to move towards what I want, suddenly my life just like took off and it felt like something magical had happened, like someone had waved a magic wand and suddenly just the heavens were raining riches down on me. But really what had happened was I was now consistently moving towards what I want. And so that's pretty big change.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
You
Margot.
moved to
That's a great
Maui.
question. Yeah, now
Yeah.
that I'm living on Maui and oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
create the life that
Totally.
you want to live.
Hmm. Yeah. Beautiful. And Margo, you weren't clear who you were asking, so I'll answer it too.
Oh, okay.
Um, parts work is newer on the scene for me. Like I've only been experiencing parts work for 3 years, and I've been doing intense inner work for 25 years, 22 years before that. So I didn't have, I had already moved most of the big boulders in my life, as I guess is what I mean, before I came to parts work, using other modalities that have been very helpful to me. And the the thing that the parts work that I've done has really shifted for me is my relationship to um, these organizations, including 12-step programs, religious structures, various things that I was kind of locked into. It turned out I had a part that really wanted me to be sort of following the dogma, like really drinking the Kool-Aid and being a card carrying, upstanding member and doing it. And then I had these other four. I didn't know what was going on inside me. But then, so I had one part that wanted that, and another part that was like, "But that's not right for me. Like I can see it here, and I can see it here, and I can see it here, and this is BS, and this is unscientific, and this is blah 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 blah." And I didn't want to be doing it, and yet I had this like war inside myself, and just a very little bit of parts work freed me from that war. For example, as everybody I think here knows, there's a 12-step program for food addiction that I came from, where there were a lot of things about it that were not a fit for me. And I came to Everett and I was like, I just have this hounding, like I need to go back to it. I need to go back to that program. Like I'm not my best self if I'm not in that program. And so he's like, so what's the part of you that wants to go back? Describe that part. And um, it's just this one session. But it turned out that I thought that part of me was my highest self. I thought because there were so many years that I was so flourishing and so well in that program when I just stayed within this narrow construct. I mean, forget that my husband left me for 9 months because my program was so rigid and he couldn't live with me anymore. Um, but there were ways that I just felt like it worked for me. But the part of me that wanted me to be back in that 12-step food addiction program was so young and ill-formed. She wasn't a strong, confident girl at all. She was just an ill-formed little girl who just didn't want to be hurt by the food anymore. She was just like, it's just safe there because you just, because then the food doesn't hurt us. And I just want to be back there. It's just safer. And she had almost no facial features. She had almost no personality. She was like just this little doll inside me that was just saying, I just want to be safe. And I thought it was like this powerful need that I needed to go back there. And I was like, that's all I have to do is keep that little girl safe. Just don't go back to the. It's like, oh yeah, that's it. Like you don't have to go back to that program. It's not right for you in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way. And it just solved this battle inside me. So yeah. And then, like I already shared here, the spiritual thing where I sometimes get like hounded by this moralistic part, and just recognizing that that's a part. I don't. I understand where it's coming from. There's some perceived safety in like towing a really tight line. I've gotten to the point in my life where I see nuance in things, right? I don't actually believe that there's any like, and if you believe it's fine. I super hold my beliefs lightly because my beliefs have changed so many times over my lifetime. Like I don't grip them tightly at all anymore. But it's like, I've sort of let go of that notion that uh that there's some specific list of like, if you just do these things, you're like signed, sealed, and delivered to a perfect life and an eternal, whatever. I'm like, I don't know if I believe that, like life is nuanced, So, yeah, it's been helpful for me to, I guess, claim the perspective of my highest self, the variety of the ways that I see things, Anyway, yeah.
Oh, thanks, Margot. Says she was touched by our replies. And
Cool.
and Beth, if you come back to the website later, you can get these slides, and then that will have the names of the books that I mentioned.
Yeah. So again, check your email, and then the email will have a replay link. Like the email will say something about if you want to see the webinar again or you missed it, click here, and that will take you to a page that will have all the resources on it, including the slides. Yeah.
And the thing that happens with parts work is you see something like the BLE parts map and you start to recognize those and you're like, whoa, I've got the seductive rationalizer, right? And it leads to the oblivionator. And pretty soon you're kind of drawn into this mystery of your inner world, right? It's like, who else is in there? Right? Like who else is in there around all the other things I have issues with? And it's, I think for all of us, there was one thing we saw that like created that curiosity to go inside. And, and we have this literal family. We have a system of parts that are inside of us that are the reason our life is the way that it is. And the thing that's interesting is we have parts within us, and your partner has parts within them, and then there's a relationship between your parts and your partner's parts, right? Like there's a system of parts in your relationships, right? And in your family there's a system of parts. And if you're someone that's always wondered why do they do that? Like why does that, this model explains human behavior more than anything else I've ever seen. Like you really start, and you not only start to understand, you start to feel compassion. right? Because you start to realize those things that trigger you and other people are just their protective parts because they have some wounded inner child that's needing to be protected. And suddenly you're able to feel compassion for something that's always just pissed you off, right? Because you have an understanding now of that person has an authentic self and parts, just like you have an authentic self and parts.
Everett, it seems like, I was going to say, it seems like the questions have slowed down. It's because I wasn't scrolling down the chat. I just scrolled a little bit. It's like, Lori just signed up. She says she's been wanting to do this since the reunion in 2018. Woo, woo,
Yay.
woo. Gina says we're amazing and the support team is incredibly responsive. Thank you. And Beth said she just got her confirmation email. It's all good.
It's all working. It's happening.
Totally.
Oh
We invite you to join us for Brightline Freedom. Go ahead and click and register. It's going to be worth your while. There's no risk, though. There's a 30-day, 100% money-back guarantee. But this is going to be the key to unlocking you living in your highest, most authentic self. Just feeling that calmness, that confidence, that ability to flourish, that self-compassion. And then that enables sticking with bright lines, which enables weight loss. It enables health. It enables more confidence and a level of flourishing that it's time for you to claim. Isn't it? It's time for you to claim.
There's a term we have in IFS called self-leadership.
And
it's living your life from your highest authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really the point of all this work, is that you're living from your highest self. And then when your parts are triggered or active, you're able to love them, and or you use these tools that we teach to heal them and transform them and then come back into your highest self.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Heather says, okay, I'm in. Okay. I should mention that one of the huge benefits I've gotten from my parts work is really understanding. And I talked about this in the vlog today. I don't know if you saw the vlog that came out today. You haven't seen it yet? I talk about recognizing the stages of breaking my bright lines. There's stages of a break. Stage one is the accumulation of a bunch of risk factors. And I actually created a spreadsheet that I'm using now to track my risk factor, my risk rating daily. And then stage two is when the food indulger part, for me, the seductive rationalizer, kicks in and starts to rationalize some way to game the system and get a hit off food while still keeping my bright lines. That's the beginning of stage two. And then stage 2 to 3 is when the oblivionator kicks in. I didn't use this language in the vlog. I didn't use the parts language, but that's what it is. Then it's full on binging. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I don't go to full on binging, but sometimes I do. So anyway, with parts work, I can see when that part starts to take over. And the spreadsheet that I created helps me to know to watch for it. Like, your risk is really high. So just notice if a voice in your head starts to find a way to eat sexier food. That's what happens for me, right? Like, why don't you, like tonight? I just shot, earlier today, I don't know how many videos. In the last 2 days, I've shot 26 videos. And with a video production team that's out in my living room, my living room has cameras and lights and equipment in it. And I got to the end of this exhausting day and knew I had to do this webinar. And you know what I did? I took my tofu and I sprayed the frying pan extra thick with spray oil and fried the tofu. It's like, I know now, that's the stress bar getting really high. And when the stress bar is higher than the support bar, as you always say, Everett, the food indulger comes in to try to fill that gap as if some extra spray oil is gonna just be a little more comforting tonight.
You know what I like about that? Because this is a systemic model of the psyche, right? So it's a systems model of the psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing you learn from systems thinking, and you're going to learn in Bright Line Freedom, is how to view your life as a system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to see how your parts are creating everything in your life, right? So you start to get this really nuanced understanding of, the reason maybe you're overwhelmed is because you have a part that can't say no. So it just says
Right.
yes to everything, right? So,
Totally.
or is afraid of conflict. So it says yes, right? And so from a systems perspective, you can see this, right? You can say, look, there's a part that can't say no, and you say yes to everything, and you've filled up your life, right? And so now you can't do anything well because you've said yes to everyone, and you're overwhelmed, and your indulger's in the lead, right? And so you can get this systemic understanding of what's happening in your life, and so you can unpack it and transform it.
I have a friend, and she was in my Gideon Games group 2 games ago, and that's her issue. She's doing way too much. And I'm just thinking, that's her. She can't say no, and she's in the food almost every time I talk with her. I love her. I don't care if she's in the food. I love her anyway, of course, right? But now I'm realizing, oh, that's the issue.
Yeah.
She's always doing too much. She can't say no, in particular to her boss.
Yeah.
Her boss has got this big life and has all this stuff going on, and she's got to work, 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 work for her boss. So she's eating to soothe that situation, like the food is the only way to make that work for her, Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, Catherine has a good one. Everett, do you want to get this one for Catherine?
Sure.
I don't know. Go ahead.
Catherine says, I don't know if anyone feels this way, but I'm not even sure if I know any of my authentic self. So sad. I dealt with a child on the spectrum and became quite the isolator. Well, so the good news, Catherine, is your authentic self is there. Like, they know it clinically now. They work with people whose systems are in very complicated places, and they can get to authentic self. So the good news is, in Bright Line Freedom, you're going to be learning lots of techniques for how to get in touch with your authentic self and start to see why you're not in touch with it. Now, sometimes people with really strong inner critics have an inner critic that says, like, oh, well, you don't have any authentic self. You're so terrible. And the truth is, if they do. And you can find it. Like, if you start dialoguing, well, do you like to be out in nature? Well, yeah, I like to go to the beach and it feels really nice. And, or when I'm with my grandchildren, you can see that self is there, but they've got an inner critic, right? That is using the concept of authentic self now to clobber them, right? Like, oh, everyone else has authentic self, but you don't, right? So just notice if something like that might also be happening, because that's kind of common for people that have got strong inner critics. But the good news is you have an authentic self. It's just obscured by your parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing I want to say about that too is it really is good news, because you don't have to develop any of those qualities. You don't have to learn how to be calm. You don't have to learn how to be compassionate. You don't have to learn how to be connected. Like, that is wired into who you are. All you have to do is get the parts out of the way that are obscuring that. And so you don't have to develop those. And that's why this is a non-pathologizing model of the psyche. Like, we really see that everyone is a system that's doing the best that it possibly can, and everyone has authentic self at their core.
Nice.
And I agree, Kathy, it is sad, right, when you look back at your life and realize that you don't have a lot of access to those qualities. So I just want to acknowledge that too. That is sad.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Shauna says, I signed up so ready to learn what it is I actually want life to be like.
Yes.
Will there be work like that in the course, Everett? Will Shauna be getting an introduction to what her authentic self, how her authentic self really wants to live, and what she wants life to be like?
Yeah, I talk about that in different ways. It's about doing enough healing work, right? So that your life isn't so crammed full of other people's stuff, right? That you start to reclaim your life for yourself. And I do a lot of parts work with people around that process. And then learning how to start to notice what brings you joy and excitement. But if you're under a layer of overwhelm, right? And your food indulger is just the only thing that's keeping you floating, like, you've got to deal with that. There's no magic pill. You've got to deal with that. And this is effective for dealing with it, actually.
So Carmen wants to know, is there a limit to the number of participants you'll accept?
A million.
There's a very strong human touch component to this course, which means there always has to be, an upper limit. We're not expecting to hit it. So Everett and I haven't discussed an actual number yet, but what's happened before in the past when we've offered inner work courses like this is every now and then, like, there'll be a rush on enrollment, and we'll have to have the conversation. I'll be like, Everett, I don't know, we need to talk. Like, how many people can you really serve? Like, let's get down to brass tacks. So yeah, there is an upper limit, but at the moment it's a theoretical upper limit.
Well, and we had 900 people in the last course, and we could have had more. Like I just was tracking, like, Q&A call, like, everything just worked. Everything felt very balanced.
People were very well served too. You had a lot of resources though. You had a lot of support lined up.
Oh yeah. I always do. Yeah.
Carmen. Perfect FOMO in full effect. There you go. Any last questions? We're coming up on 3 hours. I want to be respectful of people's time. Any last questions? Oh, Everett, so good to do this with you. We will, if you know of anyone who would like this information, we presented a lot on this webinar. We'll be doing this again live on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Is that the right time? 3 p.m. Eastern? What is that, 9 a.m. for you? Are you in Maui, Everett?
I'm in Maui, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, 3 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, yep.
Live webinar.
I get up early here.
Yeah.
I get up with the sun and the birds get really too loud.
Yeah. So again, we invite you to register for Brightline Freedom. Dive deeper with us. It's an amazing, amazing transformative experience, life-changing experience. And that experience of learning, like Everett said, the parts that are in the way of you stepping into your life with your authentic self, it's completely transformative. Yeah, Catherine, we did talk about the books. He thinks they're both on audio. Certainly one of them is. He thinks both of them are on audio. Yeah. All right, everyone. We're going to sign off.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
I hope to see you in the course.
And we'll be doing a Facebook Live tomorrow, actually. And it's a very provocative topic. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on the Brightline Eating Facebook page, and the topic is the 4 ways that self-compassion and parts work have changed my life, have transformed my life. So we will both be talking about that, and it will be super fun, and we'll be answering questions there too. So go ahead and hop into Brightline Freedom so you can get your books, and the course starts on Monday, and we will see you in there.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Good night.